Welcome to another audiobook recording. I'm doing these specials for the month of October in honor of Halloween, and I'm focusing on the first three books that I released from Tales of Wonder and Dread, and this time around it's Strange Realities. This was an updated version with some newer stories and things in it, and it's a collection of my stuff. And the story I want to read to you is called The Debut Tour. Now, this has been published several places before this book, including a collection my friend Henrik did in the Netherlands. But in any event, I'll read you The Debut Tour. I am scribbling this as quickly as I can in hopes that I can warn the world before it is too late. It is already too late for me. They will be coming for me soon. Hopefully there's time for everyone else if they just know the truth. I'll start at the beginning. My name is Gavin Henderson. I'm a writer for Hot Rock magazine. I typically focus on long exposés of bands who are up and coming. That is how this horrible adventure began. I'd been assigned to cover the band Lordsmith. Their debut disc, Bedlam for Breakfast, had come out of nowhere, soaring up the charts. They had yet to play a live show, and still the group's mixture of hypnotic space rhythms, swirling keyboards, and dark metal guitars was capturing radio stations and fans everywhere. It was the biggest selling debut of all time. The band was getting ready to embark on their tour, and I was to be along for the ride. I was looking forward to seeing what all the hype was about. Early buzz said that their live show was going to be something unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Still, press releases always make claims like that. The actual product seldom delivers on the promises. I arrived at the stadium and was greeted by the band's tour manager, Don Hughes. Hughes looked like he had worked a lot of tours, but there was something odd about the look in his eyes. I attributed it to some sort of drug, as I could smell no alcohol in his breath. Still, I had not known many tour managers to drink or partake before the show. They had too much to do to risk being off of their game. In any event, Don led me back to the dressing room, and I waited for the arrival of the group. This was to be a preliminary interview, and I would just be working the entire tour with the band after that. I was to live essentially as one of the crew, but with no job to do for the production. The first to arrive was frontman Asmaratus. They all went by otherworldly names. I introduced myself, but when I put out my hand to shake his, he simply ignored it. I chalked it up to the fact that musicians are a strange lot and got on with business. I couldn't help but notice his appearance, though. Apparently he was already in his stage makeup. His facial features looked like some kind of combination between an alien from another world, a corpse, and a demon. The makeup was impeccable, even under this light, but the real shocker were the eyes. Whoever designed his contact lenses must be both a genius and insane. The pupils of his eyes resembled a starscape, and at times I could swear that I saw the cosmic bodies moving within. It was uncanny. In any event, we spoke for about 15 minutes about the album and the upcoming tour, and he never once broke character. I'd done interviews with other bands while they were in character, so this was not a huge deal, but even so, his act seemed different somehow. He spoke of old gods banished from the cosmos and set to return. He really seemed to believe this garbage, and somehow that was a little unsettling. As the door opened, the band's bassist, Karanzan, entered. The pause was a bit of a relief. This one also was made up in exactly the same way as the group's singer. I didn't make the mistake of attempting to shake his hand, waiting instead for him to offer his. He didn't. We got back to our conversation, and I turned to the lyrical content of the music. Those lyrics tell a tale much like I had been hearing for the last quarter hour, the doomsday return of the true rulers of planet Earth. The thing is, both of these guys swore up and down that the lyrics were all factual and the prophecy of what was to come. I was torn between feeling a bit creeped out and thinking about what a great story this was going to make. As the rest of the band entered wearing the same outfits, it was just about time for them to get ready to hit the stage. So I told them I would see them later and made my way to the wings to watch the show. The hall was already darkened and smoke filled the air around the stage. A dark curtain with the name Lordsmith was draped across the front of the stage. But from my vantage point, I could see in. From what I could make out in the darkness, the stage set was even more elaborate than those used by Kiss and Alice Cooper. This was obviously going to be some show. Introductory music Sort of an electronic gothic fanfare began to play, and the curtain opened as surreal lighting began to play in patterns across the stage. The band members emerged from holes in the stage, rising in unison, instruments in hand, amidst the cheering of the crowd. Instead of stopping at the floor, though, they all continued rising up, moving upwards to a height of around 8 feet. Then they began playing. As they did, they floated effortlessly in the air above the stage, rising and descending and moving all around. This was a better effect than I had seen David Copperfield pull off. The stage set was also unbelievable. The backdrop was a starscape, just like the contact lenses the band wore. But these objects I know were moving. It was an incredible effect, as if you were staring into a section of deep space. All around the stage, odd objects of varying shapes and colors moved around, altering their appearance as they did so. This was one show that lived up to the hype. As they made their way through the music from the album, the crowd was becoming whipped into a frenzy. Some were moshing, some were moving rhythmically to the sound. It was an odd combination. About 3/4 of the way into the show, a fan jumped the security fence and made it to the stage before security could catch him. The really odd thing was that after a few moments, he too began to rise in the air. At first I was a bit astonished. Then I realized he must be part of the act, a plant in the audience. As his flight continued, he rose higher and higher. Eventually he was above the level of the band, and I remember thinking that the guy was a good actor because he really looked surprised at the whole thing. After a time, the stage jumper started moving in crazy ellipses all around the stage. He was rising and diving and swirling around in no particular pattern. Then, after several minutes of this, he began to be drawn toward the back of the stage. As he began to approach the backdrop, lines of color started emerging from it, looking as if they were trying to reach out and grab him, but having trouble finding their target. Then he actually moved into the starscape, getting swallowed up by it, and after a time it was impossible to see him. For all in the room, he was gone forever. I definitely was convinced that this was the greatest set of special effects I had ever seen. The show soon drew to a dramatic conclusion. The band left the stage, roadies loaded up gear, and we loaded onto the buses. I had wanted to ask the group about the special effects, but they apparently had their own bus, and I was on the one with the crew. As the buses and semis pulled away, heading towards our next destination, I posed the question to the tour manager. Still with that same drugged look on his face, he told me that he really didn't know anything about that part of the production. The band handled the whole thing, keeping it completely in secrecy, even from him. We all eventually went to sleep during the ride, but I made sure that I would ask the group tomorrow to see if they would reveal anything to me. The next afternoon I got my chance, as I was set to talk to Master Ancolo, the group's guitarist. He was already in full makeup. I gathered that was why they had gone straight to their tour bus the night before, to keep me from seeing them without their costumes. After discussing playing techniques and the like, I turned the question into those amazing effects. I remember thinking this group never drops the act, because he told me that there were no special effects, but rather that everything you see on stage is real. This was definitely the most consistent and provocative show I'd ever seen, to be sure. That day I made the rounds, speaking to the rest of the band off and on, none of them ever breaking character. Eventually the time for the show came. It was essentially the same show as the night before, but I decided they must be hiring local actors for the stage jumper role, as on this night there were two. I did not see the young man from the night before, but instead tonight it was a different man and a woman. The effect of them climbing into the stage was the same, though. They levitated almost as soon as they got there, then did the whole whirling dervish around the stage, at times looking like they might collide, then disappeared amongst the beams of light into the backdrop. I had started to feel a bit listless by this point, chalking it up to the long hours and intensity of the shows. I told myself that I never used to get like this on tours, and promised to eat better and get vitamins. Must be getting old, was my final conclusion. In any event, I didn't really feel like doing a lot of interviewing that day, and we still had a long tour ahead, so there would be time. Something odd happened that day, though. A detective from the first town the band had played showed up and spoke to the crew of the band. He was accompanied by two officers from Providence, where we were now. I didn't get a chance to hear what they were talking about, and when I asked later, no one would give me a clue as to why they had been there. I made a note to myself to check into this, thinking I had found a new angle to the story. This night's show became something a lot bigger than the ones that preceded it. Apparently they were continually revamping their program to keep it different, was my impression. Much of the show went the same, but on this night the crowd was a little more subdued, seeming to be more into the swaying and trance-like dancing than any of the moshing of the previous nights. No one even tried to make his or her way to the stage. That didn't stop some of them from doing so anyway. About half an hour before the end of the concert, 4 people from separate parts of the front row levitated out of their seats and drifted onto the stage area, the whirling and swirling display coming from them. Another difference is that on this night, one of the beams of light actually hit one of them. It was a teenage girl. When she got hit, a surprised look leapt across her face and she just vanished. Now that was some effect. After the concert, I was exhausted and had no energy to do anything but get some sleep. The road must be weighing on the crew, I thought, noting that many of them had begun to get that same glazed look that the tour manager Hughes had. I looked in the mirror to check myself for the look. It wasn't there, but I definitely had seen myself looking healthier. I decided that a good night's sleep would be the cure and retired to get it. The afternoon setup routine was interrupted the next day by another visit from the police. This time there were detectives from each of the previous cities, a different one than I had seen the day before, along with several local officers and 2 FBI agents. This was apparently big news and I had to make sure I could get a look at it. I tried to inconspicuously make my way over to hear what was going on. I didn't catch all of it, but what I did get caused the hairs on the back of my neck to stand straight up. Apparently the first batch of officers had turned in their reports saying they had nothing to go on in this case, and then committed suicide, each of them in exactly the same way, by hanging themselves in the closet. I also gathered that the original investigation centered on a missing person. I couldn't get much more without being seen, but the officers decided to speak to me anyway. As they approached, so did Asmaratus. He introduced us and invited and turned to walk away. My attention was on the officers, and that's the last I remembered. The next thing I knew, it was 5 hours later, and I was sitting alone in the band's dressing room. From the sounds coming from the stage, it was obvious they were in the middle of their set. I wondered if there was something really wrong with me physically. I didn't even make it out to see the show that night, instead going to the bus, climbing into my bunk and sleeping. I woke up at almost 5 the next evening. We had arrived in Chicago, but I had a day off before the next show. I figured this was my chance to see a doctor, so I found a walk-in clinic to get checked out at. The doctor told me that I seemed like I was suffering from exhaustion and malnutrition. He gave me a vitamin shot, a diet to follow, and told me to get more rest. I stopped at a restaurant to have a good meal. I probably would have felt better after having those 2 energy boosts had I not happened to pick up a newspaper while I was walking. The Lordsmith tour had made the news in a big way. It was front page material. Apparently the guy from the stage the night of the first show had turned up missing. All the police who had investigated had put in reports saying there was nothing to follow up on and then killed themselves. The same held true of the second and third nights. The night that I slept through the show, there had been a whole contingency of local, state, and federal officers in attendance, yet 3 more people turned up missing. Apparently the FBI and National Guard would be in attendance for the Chicago show. This was becoming a whole different story than I had anticipated. I was frankly getting very scared. The next day I stayed clear of everyone in the crew and the band. I got plenty of rest to be ready to cover this event. I decided to watch from the audience instead of the sidelines this time. Since it was a sold-out concert, I had to buy a ticket from a broker to do it. In any event, the show went essentially the same as it had on the nights I did see it. But this time, there was a virtual platoon of officers and agents watching every move. They were videotaping the whole thing and letting nothing go unnoticed. That didn't stop 2 more fans from being swallowed up by the starscape, though. It was at this point, as the crew was tearing down the set, that I made the decision to leave. Story or no story, I had the feeling that I was in way over my head. I just wanted out. As fate would have it, that was not to be. As I gathered my belongings and stepped off the bus, I was greeted by the entire band. They told me that it was time for them to talk with me and ushered me away to their bus. I had the overwhelming desire to run, but for some reason I didn't. That night on the tour bus was when my whole reality changed. They explained to me that everything in their act was true. There were old gods, and they were going to be returning to take their rightful place in control of the earth. They said that they themselves were heralds of these gods, setting into motion the path to bring them back. I was shaking with fear at this time. It was a crazy story, and a few days ago I would have believed it to be hype. However, after everything that had happened and all I had seen, I believed them. They told me that I could not leave now because I knew too much, and followed me to the crew bus. I knew at this point that I needed to escape. All I needed was a plan. The last couple of days I hadn't really seen the crew, but tonight I had a look around the bus. All of them wore the same glazed expression. They seemed more like machines at this point than human beings. I would get no help from them. I figured they might also not make much resistance for me. Fortunately, I was right, and you would never have had the chance to read this account. As the vehicles pulled away, first the semis, then the band bus, and finally ours, I saw my opportunity. I pushed open the emergency exit and dashed out of the moving bus. I hit the pavement and rolled along the edge of the parking lot, but I feared the crew never noticed. I had the feeling someone else had, though. I got up and took off running as fast as I had ever run, feeling the whole time as if I was being watched. The venue was near a large park, and I ran into there to hide in this shack. I felt for the first time that I wasn't being watched, but I assumed that it wouldn't last long. That brings us to the present. I hear a strange wind blowing in the park behind me now, and I think they're coming closer. I will hide this under the broken plank in the floor and go out to meet my destiny. It is too late for me, but I pray that someone gets this and can stop them in time. Anyway, that's obviously a Lovecraftian story, meant to be, and it's in Strange Realities, and you can pick that up at lulu.com/spotlight/strange sounds. Strange sound, singular, sorry. Spooky Ventures is the home for spooky content and spooky merchandise on the web. Check it out today at spookyventures.com. And remember, always keep it spooky.